How are you doing, Brian?
I'm doing pretty well. Bienvenue to those who are in France, and for everyone else, you'll have to deal with my American English. I am so pumped to be here. I have dreamed of like Twitch streaming, no code building while I'm figuring it out, embarrassing myself and finding things out on the real time track. And Joyce, I'm like so proud of us, and I'm so happy that we're both game to like do this.
Brian joined the Xano team recently, and I joined WeWeb last year. And basically, I'm learning a lot of WeWeb and Xano, and he's learning a lot of WeWeb and Xano. And of course, we're stumbling along the way. And we thought it would be fun to stumble in front of you and to show you that even though in our roles, I guess it's the same for you, Brian, but for me, I record a lot of the tutorials for the academy. So sometimes people view me as an expert, except what they don't know is that it took me like 4 takes to get the tutorial right. And
For
I
sure.
messed up a lot along the way. So
One of the things that I just love about WeWeb, about Xano, and about our broader community is just how much we care about helping each other learn and making it friendly and fun. So I feel like this is a way to pay forward for all of the many videos that y'all have created out there. Thank you so much for helping me in my journey, and I hope many more people will be inspired to do the same.
let's get started. Let me share my screen. And our little heads will go down there. So this is in WeWeb. This is a project I'm working in WeWeb for the UI, for the front end, and I have a Xano instance for the backend. And it's actually a project I started building before Brian and I even connected, because I'm one of the things I'm in charge of at WeWeb is like creating content, writing content that's helpful. And I thought, you know what? I spent a lot of time writing the content, but then I don't really have time to promote it. I don't take the time to promote it. So it's cool because the content exists. It's not so cool because it's people don't find the content necessarily.
So first off, I think this project itself is just incredibly useful to our community. For those of you who know KP, what's up, KP? Building in public is also a lot about telling stories and creating content, and making that content accessible and bite-sized is so important to invite people into your longer form content. And it's just a lot to keep up with. So when I saw what Joyce was building, I was, super excited. To be honest, I want this app for myself. It would be super helpful in my role. And so we thought showing you guys how we're building it and then making it available to you as something you can play with once it's done. Hopefully will give you all a leg up. But, Joyce, I'd love for you to tell a little bit about who inspired you to build this app, because
Yeah,
so
for
much of
sure.
the thinking behind it is, really intelligent and interesting.
So in Xano, I have a database with hubs and spokes. And so the notion of hub and spoke is something that I got from Justin Welsh. Okay, so Justin has this really cool courses. I got one that I got the Content OX course. And the way he thinks about content is he says, you spend time writing a hub, like a big piece of content. In his case, it's a newsletter. I think for us at WeWeb, it would be a blog article or maybe a newsletter, but it could be a podcast episode. It could be, a tutorial. The idea is it's a big piece of content. And then what he says is that he works on a big piece of content, and then what he creates spokes around that piece of content. So you have that your hub, your main piece of content, and then you spread them out into several spokes. And Xano, what I did is I started listing like the articles that I wanted to write about. And some of them have a status of backlog. And I told myself um, I only want like 5 or 6 that are allowed to not be in back. No, actually, I want only 5 um, that are visible, that not done or not in backlog. And for each one, I have a target date. And then what I also have is I took a content type. So we have the hub, and all of these are spokes. Let me zoom in a little bit. From item 2 to item 9, these are spokes. So what Justin refers to as spokes. And the idea is your pre-hub spoke is something you'll post on social media to kind of promote the fact that your main content is coming out the next day. And then post-hub is the opposite. You kind of say, hey, you missed this. And then you have 6 other approaches. So kind of And for each one, Justin provides kind of a template that you can use to write those posts. And so we have those spokes. And what I have in WeWeb, what I started doing is that I connected Xano. I got all my hubs, my list of articles that I wanted to write. I got all of them from Xano into WeWeb. And then I have this Kanban element where I go ahead and get the hubs, all the hubs that I have in Xano. Except then, because in my Kanban, I'm only showing to do, in progress, and done. I don't have those the backlog ones. And the reason I didn't want my backlog ones is because otherwise I get distracted. So when it's time to finish an article, I just start working on another one instead. And Samuel is asking, like, should you normally think of the data before working on the design or vice versa? What do you think, Brian?
The first step that I always take in data architecture is like, how do I think about this? How do I want this to work? So even before, necessarily I'm going in and building tables or building my app, I might just draw down on paper or spin up like a Miro board or a FigJam board, which are my two favorites, to just kind of visualize, like, how do I want this data to be able to talk to each other? I will say, obviously as a Xano fan, generally speaking, I like to get a basic architecture in the tables first because I want to be able to visualize how they talk to each other. So I want to give you guys a little bit of a picture here. This is a really cool tool that we have. So with my screen up here, if you log into Xano and you go to your database tables, and you can see here, I've got the database tables. Both Joyce and I are in a shared Xano environment right now. It's one of our new updates. We're super proud of it. I'm so excited to show you guys how we're actually going to be able to build together. Shout out to Sean, our CTO, who absolutely crushed it, and our QA team, who was like working through the weekend and everything to put it out. It's been an absolute game changer for me, certainly as a developer advocate. You can see right up here, there I am, and there Joyce is. And, we can even chat back and forth right here in Xano. Not that we need to, of course, it's not meant to replace your primary chat, but it's there. And right under that is this show table relationships. And what I'll do is I'll just zoom out so you can see this a little bit, and then zoom back in. But what you can see is it's actually showing how, for example, I have a spoke, and a spoke, it has a content type and it belongs to a hub. And I can see that relationship that I have here. So this is I think one of the most important things that I've learned about building an application is, how do I want my tables to be able to talk to each other? And just put down a first version of that. One of the amazing things about Xano, and I think no-code tools generally, is if you find out later that you did it wrong, you can change it pretty easily. You'll lose some data in the process, generally speaking, or you might have to change the way things work on the front end. So I always try to build a few pieces of the puzzle that just say, like, how do I want these to relate to each other first? Because I find my brain works very differently when I'm looking at the table versus when I'm looking at the app that I'm building. I'm curious, Joyce, like, how do you sort of get to a place where you feel comfortable that your tables have the right fields and are connected to each other in the right way?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And honestly, I think everybody has different methods of doing it. I tend to start with the data as well. I think generally you should probably start with the data anyway, because, like, as you said, Brian, it's about asking yourself, what do I actually need this app to do? And in my case, for this app, it was like, okay, so my problem is that I have a long list of articles that I know I should write, and I've started like 10 of them, but I haven't, I finished only one. And I need to finish one every week. And that's the first part of the problem. So I'm not even talking about the spokes about then, promoting them. So that's the first thing that I did, was like, okay, well, I need my list of articles in my Xano instance. And if I share my screen again, I can move to Xano. So I think the first thing I did was create this hub and I thought, okay, I need a title. I probably need a status. Afterwards, I added the description. Afterwards, I added the writer. I didn't need that right away. Afterwards, I added a field for the target date, but I didn't need all that at the beginning. So I just started with a title. And the reason I started with only a title and a status is because right away in WeWeb, I wanted to see if I could add the collection to WeWeb and display it on a Kanban board. And that kind of, and I thought, okay, well, yeah, the Kanban could be cool. And then once I had that, so it's not much of a design because this is actually a template that I use the CRM template we have in WeWeb that we used actually with that we have the corresponding Xano backend for that template. Anyway, I used that and I thought, yeah, a Kanban board makes sense for a series of article because I want to see what's to do and what's in progress and what's done. And once I had that, I thought, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to check if when I move it to do and done, if it updates in Xano. So I checked that. I did that. I made sure that that workflow worked and that it updated Xano. And then the next thing I wanted to do was like, okay, well, the next problem I want to solve is when an article is done, I want to let me maybe show you in preview what the app does. When it's done, when I move it to done, sorry. So when I move it to done in WeWeb, I want to be invited. I want to have this list of spokes and decide which ones I want to create. So by default, they were selected. So then since I wanted to do that, I needed to create the table in Xano. So then I started thinking, okay, do the spokes go in the hub table? Like, is it actually just one table for all the content or is it two separate tables? And I went back and forth on that. And the only way I figured it out is that I created the table spokes. And actually, we might see later, or maybe in another stream, but having them in two separate tables is problematic in one case, but having them in the same table is more problematic because in my WeWeb, I want to display also a list of spokes, only the spokes, because I want to once I've finished the article, I want to be done with it. So it's a very long answer, Samuel, to tell you I start with the data, but I do a lot of back and forth.
So
I do a
I'd
lot of
love
back and
to
forth with my design.
I'd love to spin up a little Miro board here real quickly and just visualize for everyone this conversation. And then what I'm thinking might be helpful, Joyce, is to actually start with how you took your content, your hub, and made the connection so that you could change the status by moving it. I think that'd be fun to show. So I'm just sharing my board right now. So let me just quickly walk this through. So I've got articles, right? I know that I have articles, but what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be calling them hubs. And so I've got, hub 1, and then I've got hub 2. And the first thing that occurs to me as you share this, right, is, okay, well, I know that for each one of these hubs, I'm going to want to create spokes, basically all of the social posts that I'm going to do around it. So now I can say I've got spokes. And the question is, what is the relationship between articles and spokes? If you put these all into the same data set, then you can't look at these spokes or hubs separately easily. And I think that design decision you made, which said, I want to be able to look at all of my spokes going out the door, regardless of what hub they're in, that's what tells us that we want to be able to come over here and say, okay, well, hub 1 has, let's give this a little bit of a different color. This has spoke 1, and then we've got, spoke 2, and spoke 3. But when we go to our next hub, hub 2 over here, we're actually going to be saying, well, it's not going to be spoke 1 anymore. It's going to be spoke 4 and spoke 5 and so on. So if you want to learn more about this topic, the thing that I would really encourage you to spend some time, and there's some great YouTube videos on this, is what's called database normalization. It's when I have different categories of things, what is their relationship? Is it a one-to-one relationship? For every one hub, there's one spoke. Is it a one-to-many relationship? For every one hub, there are many spokes. Or is it a many-to-many relationship? Could a spoke be about more than one hub? Now, I think in this case, Joyce, the design decision you made is I only want my spokes to be related to one hub at a time.
Yeah. And if I go back to the Xano database, what I have here is if I have my list of spokes, I have the hub ID. So a spoke is related. And here I'm on ID 125 because I did a lot of tests. So I created a lot of spokes that I then deleted. Again, important to note, you don't get it right the first time. You have to run a lot of tests. And so I'm saying the content type. So the type of spoke is this type. And we have no hubs in this one because we're in the spoke table. And the related hub, the one hub it relates to, is this.
I think a mistake that often, even I make when I'm beginning to do what's this one-to-many relationship is I would think, oh, I'll go to my hub table and I'll build a column that has all the spokes in it. So hub one will have a column with, an array that has spoke 1, 2, and 3. But what you're seeing here, everyone, is that actually doing it the other way around is more efficient. I have a spoke and I tie it back to a hub. So that's one of the things you can think about. If I have a lot of objects and I want them to be classified by one thing, I'll do the classification in the many instead of in the one. And that will also help you build a more high, it's will help with performance as well. Not only will it help you build something that's easy and makes sense to use, but your database will perform faster if you design it properly.
Nice.
Cool.
And actually, I didn't know the term database normalization. I remember someone talking to me about something like but I don't know if that's what it means. But I understood that like an atomic database, like the idea of making each item, I guess, as small as possible, or so that if you make one change, it doesn't mess up to lower the risk of messing up a large amount of data. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I understood it.
It really does. And I think this is another design choice that, I would just encourage everyone to make, let yourself play with your app, put in content that doesn't matter into your databases and see if it works the way that you think it does before you commit to putting I certainly, when I first built databases, I would put all of the, I put thousands of records into my tables and then go, oh no, these don't talk to each other the way that I thought they did. I have to redo all this work. So keeping it light, keeping it small, keeping it something that, if you had to throw it away and rebuild it, you wouldn't feel too bad about it, will help you get to your destination more quickly. Interestingly enough, by the way, I think as no-coders, sometimes we can think that, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, and so I keep messing this up. I think that's a really common emotion that I see from no-coders. And I just want you to know that full-on systems engineers and data architects take this approach as well for the very same reason, because it's just the way our brains work. If you've seen it 1,000 times, you still might misperceive some way in which the items relate to each other. So even, if you're very experienced in database design, building a model that you play with first is a way to de-risk all of your decisions and interactions before you commit to putting in a lot of effort.
Yeah, and I think that's why I do a lot of back and forth, because basically every time I'm checking that it's working, because I don't have that technical background, it's I'm just learning by doing. So it's hard for me to anticipate when it will work or not. So I just check all the time if it works. Also, because I did do a little bit of Python, and it happens with code, especially with programming. It happens that you write code, and then you're like, okay, you run it, and it doesn't work, and then you have to you have to check each step of the way where you went wrong. So now I've just learned my lesson, and I just check every step of the way.
Now here I thought you were just using ChatGPT the whole time.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Sorry.
So to bring it back, I would love to go back to that first step that you took where you created the content and then you set up the statuses so that they would change in Xano when you use the Kanban board on the WeWeb side. Can you kind of show us how you made that happen?
Sure. Just maybe one last thing about the design. As you can
Yeah.
see, the design isn't extremely pretty, Samuel. So my plan for the design, like my focus for this app was I want it to work. And once it does work, I will ask a designer if they can make it pretty. Because like I want this urgently, so I just want it to work. That's my priority. And yeah, back to the Kanban. Let me maybe refresh um, the spokes here. So let's see if I'm
Oh, and this is
getting.
one thing I love about the way that you guys have done this is that when you hit that refresh, you can see the data coming through, so you can
Mm.
know that the connection is working. Because that one gets me all the time.
So let me check first my database with the hubs because I should have. So I have 3 in done and 2 in to do. And so I have this one in progress, how to build a secure app. Oh, that's funny. That's a duplicate. So that's probably a little bug I have here. Let me reload my page.
Here we go. We're going to get into some real-time diagnostics. I love this.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm fine. Um, okay, so I have to do and done, which is fine. And so what I did was really not much because in the CRM template where we have that Kanban, and actually it's true as well if you open if you use the Kanban element that's in the UI kit. So we can drag and drop one. Let's drag and drop one here. You can include variables with fake data. Uh, I won't do it this time because I don't want to mess up my project and create a bunch of variables here. But when you add a Kanban on a page like we do here, the workflow already exists. So there is already a workflow that says on item moved, and you check if the status is something something. So what I
I
did,
love that.
yeah, it's I think it's been about 6 months now since we started doing that on Elements, and for us, it was a big breakthrough when we were able to include variables and workflows in the elements that we dragged and dropped here. And it has a workflow by default. And what I'm saying is that when an item is moved, so this comes with a hub. What I want to do is I want to post. I want to use this. I want to execute this workflow. And this workflow is actually, I created it separately because then it's a global workflow that I can reuse anywhere. So the workflow that I'm using is post hub. It's, and again, interestingly, I actually used the global workflow from the CRM template and updated it with my data because it was easier for me to reverse engineer that way than start it from scratch. So it depends on the project I'm working on. Sometimes I'll start from scratch. Sometimes I'll just take a template and reverse engineer and make it my own. So what the workflow does, it's a request. It's a Xano request, and it and I need to update that because I just updated that. So it's a post, and it will post the hub with, I think, the hub ID. Yeah.
Yeah, so and I'd love to just for people who aren't oriented yet. So what you're seeing in the workflow is that you're selecting the Xano request collection connector. The type is request. The content type is default, your application JSON. So for those of you who are just beginning to learn about JSON, that's actually what's getting passed between Xano and WeWeb right now is a JSON object. And then this one thing I love about the way you've designed the flow here is the API group there. So if you just click that dropdown, that's the actual workspace. So if we go over to Xano, and this was really helpful for me. And yeah, if we go back to your instance, there's the content machine. So that's the Xano workspace. And then when we go into the Xano workspace itself, and you go to the API right there, which is what it's hitting, there's your default work group. So you can create as many API groups as you want to, and you'll be able to easily find them in WeWeb in that dropdown. And then in those groups, you'll be able to find the end node that you're using in workflow. So I found it really easy to sort of map my way from what it was I wanted to do in WeWeb to how I'd set things up in Xano because of that.
Nice. And so we see in Xano that this is the endpoint that I'm probably interested in. You know, I want to update the hub status, so I need to pass the hub ID I need to tell Xano what's the hub ID, and then maybe pass information through to it. Or not actually, because in this case, I just want to update the status. So I could just say that I don't want to make this visible from the API. Is that here? No, it's the required.
So you can do it through visibility. You can also
Yep.
do it in the function stack itself, in case you want to do something like, have the option of changing the information if it's different. So the way
Yeah.
that this is working right now, how about I walk through this
Yeah.
Xano function together and just
Yeah.
explain to everyone what's happening when the workflow goes to this function. Okay, so I'll bring this over. Oh, and it's fun. See, you can see we're both editing it here together. And one of the things you can see is that you've been making changes that are revertible. So if we wanted to go back to the original version that you had at the beginning, we could just click here.
Yeah.
But since, of course, you're just going back and forth, we can safely publish these changes and it'll be fine. Pro tip, if you've learned how to use run and debug, which is a way that you can test a function right here, in Xano with data that you fill out here in that JSON object that we talked about, and you've changed the way that your function works and it's all working, you have to click publish in order for WeWeb to have those changes. So this is something I often will find myself forgetting to do. Clicking publish is how WeWeb will have the changes when it interacts with Xano, because the run and debug will be up to speed on all the changes you make here. So it kind of gives you that testing environment where you can play around and then publish. So let's walk this through on the Xano side for a second. So first off, the way that these endpoints are being set up is a database link is being created. So as a quick orientation for those of you who might not be familiar with Xano, every endpoint in Xano is a function stack, meaning that you have the ability to bring data in and play with it in the function stack. And we create a bunch of these for you automatically. That's what you're seeing here. This is one of the, because there's a hub table, it creates what are called CRUD endpoints, creates, remove, update, and delete. Create, read, update, and delete. So I might just want to create, might want to add a row. I might want to just read what's in there. I might want to change the information, or I might want to delete it. And in this case, this is a edit record. So this is a post. That means we're gonna take the information in and we're gonna change the information that's inside of the database. And so in this case, when that hub ID is being passed through, the one that you're moving from one status to the next, what WeWeb is doing is it's sending this hub ID through, but you're also sending through the title, description, status, writer, and target date. And you're actually on the with the default function here, you're updating all of that information every time. So even though on the Kanban board, you're only actually changing the status, Xano is overwriting the title, description, status, writer, and target date every time you call this end
Which
node.
means that if I forget to bind that data, it erases.
It will erase it. That's
Yeah.
it. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's okay, when you're first just getting started. That's why we have these defaults here. Is it's okay to use it in this way. But if you want to make a function that's very efficient, then you only take an action on the database when there's a job to do. So one of the things that we could do here that might be kind of fun is we could actually clone this endpoint and make it just for status changes, which is what I'll do for you right now. So I'm going to clone this and I'm going to say, okay, I want to do hub, and we're going to say status and then hub ID. So I'm making a copy of this function stack. So if I go back here to my API group and I look down here at hub, I can see there's my edit record hub. But I also now have this new one called hub status. And if I go into hub status, what I can do now is I can say, well, I really don't need all of these things. I just need the hub integer and the new status. And this status is of a type called enum. What enum means is that if I go into hub right now and I open this up, let's see if I just pull one of these up. There you go. So enum means I can only select specific values. If I tried to put something in here like blocked or on hold, it wouldn't work. I would get an error because the only options that I have are to do, in progress, done, or backlog. If I wanted to add a new value to this, I'd need to update it here in the settings, and I'd need to add a new value right here. So walking this all the way back to where we were with the new hub status endpoint, what we're going to do is we're just going to take these and we're going to say, you know what? I'm going to hide this input. I'm going to hide this one here. And I'm going to hide this one here. I'm going to hide that one there. And I'm going to hide this one here. And I'm going to save this. So now the only two things that I'm going to be bringing in are hub ID and status for this one. And then what I can do is I can do the same thing here. So what you're looking at is find the hub record by field. It's going in and it's saying, I'm going to edit the record. I'm going to find the ID. And based on the ID that I'm provided here in the field value, this is a really important one to make sure that you have. If it's blank, that's probably why your function is not working. So that's something to check as you're building. And what you can see now is we've automatically hidden all these other ones because we're not even expecting anything to come through. So the only thing that's going to get updated is your status. And then if I were to run and debug this right now, I could say, okay, let's, and this is something that I like to do. So I'll typically have, one browser tab dedicated to my API, and then I'll have one dedicated to my database, just so it's a little bit easier to look at it.
Yeah, I do.
So here's my hub. Yeah, and so I'm going to just take number 14 here, and I'm going to move it from done to do. So we're just going to say number 14. We're going to say do. Now, again, since this is enum, I have to make sure I spell this exactly as written. So that's a lowercase d there. So it's going to be to do. And then I'm going to run this. And there you go. The result that I get back is it says, okay, there you go. There's number 14. And its status is now to do. And if I look right here, it says done. If I refresh the table, there you go. It now says to do. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Joyce, so that you can show on the WeWeb side that its status has changed. And then do you want to maybe try out this new end node that we just created together? I'll give you the endpoint here on the chat.
Sure. Let's do it. So let's go first on our page and refresh here to see if we get it. So which one was it?
Exactly, right? It was how to build a web app
that scales.
That scales. There you go.
All right, perfect. And so if I want to use that endpoint now, the first thing I need to do is I need to go ahead and look at my my workflow, the global workflow that I called post hub ID. So let's go to my global workflows. Or actually, you know what? I'll just, instead of executing the workflow, I will make the request here instead of using a global workflow. It will be easier to demonstrate. So here the content type is default, and the API group, I can go ahead, get this one in, how did we call it? Hub status, I think. So it's this one here.
Mm-hmm.
So now the hub ID, if I enter the value, that will be the ID of the item that was moved. So it's this ID here of the ID that was moved. And then, so I'm wondering why it's offering, let me refresh it to see if, because I'm wondering why it's offering to, we hid those from the API, right? From the public API.
We did, but we didn't remove them, so they might still be listed in the Swagger documentation, which I can walk people through if you want to go for it. But you should be able to select in body field. You can remove those, right?
Okay, so let's try this. See what happens if I do this. So And check if that status is done. Okay, that's something else. That's the rest of my workflow. If the new status of the card is done, I show that pop up, that modal with a new spokes, but we don't care about that for now. So what we care about is seeing in preview mode, and we need to be in preview mode to test this. Let's say debugging API calls. Actually, well, I gave it the done. Here, let's see if it, let's look at Xano and see what happened here. Hub, how to build. So it's the debugging API calls. No, it doesn't look like I made it work. So let's see here. I'm gonna move it back here. Let's see what's happening here. So I have my workflow here.
It's good. I was hoping we would get into some trouble on this first one.
Yeah. So the hub ID is, yes, that is the ID, so that's okay. The new status is done. Let me see if I bind it to something else. Or actually, before I do that, let's see. Can I test it here? I'm not sure I can test it here. So response. Value hub ID is not a valid integer.
Are you ready for this? I think I know what the issue is. I think I need to publish my changes.
Nice.
Let me go ahead and publish my changes, and let's see if that if that fixes it.
Okay, I'll have a look. So maybe if I refresh, let me refresh. There we go. So now we only have one, because I thought it was strange that it was displaying those those other options. So that's it. So it's interesting because it knew WeWeb was aware of the new endpoint, but since we hadn't published it yet, it didn't. It just defaulted to the endpoint that it had cloned to the initial endpoint.
Yeah, okay, and the important thing here is, of course, I did all of that on purpose.
Of course. The one thing, though, the error message did not hint at that. The error message is telling me that the value is not a valid integer, even though it seems to me like it's a valid integer. But let's see. So let's try this again. No.
Yeah, see, so the way I'm reading this message is it says that this is an error status 400. So hub ID is not a valid integer. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so
let me try this. Let me try. So ID is an integer here. Okay. Let's try that. Okay. I thought I heard a Q join us, but no. Let's see if I need to. If I use a no-code formula to turn it for sure into an integer, what happens? No, I'm still getting. It's not a valid integer. Now let's look. Refresh that. This is still. It's funny. How come do I need to publish as well? Oops. Sorry, you cut off your video, Brian.
Yeah, my connection dropped out. So go ahead and publish your changes here, and then what I'd actually love to do is walk you through like how we would troubleshoot this on our side. So so if you go in Xano back to the hub status.
What do you mean?
So if you go to your API group and to the hub status endpoint, yep. Okay, and then if you click the triple dots on the top right there, So all the way to the top right, and click request history. Yeah, so there we go. We get that bad request. So we can click on that bad request. And what we can see here is, let's look at the input. So if you do the arrow there, yep, and then status. So what happened here is only the status was passed. The ID actually wasn't passed.
Interesting.
So if we go back to WeWeb, what I'm curious about is if
I think
we might,
it's okay.
yeah.
Sorry, you were gonna say?
No, I take over because I'm not quite sure how to troubleshoot this on the WeWeb side yet.
Okay, so I think what I would do is, because this is, see here, it thinks that we're sending this. It's not getting the one, it's not getting the variable.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
only getting this. So, but the hub ID should be. I'm gonna try one like this, but I think it might be. Yeah. So it looks like when I bound to the item here, for some reason. Well, actually, let me try again with this.
Is that because we switched from a global workflow to a request type?
No, it looks like there's a problem when I bind. If I bind this, see, if I write one, if I say it's item one,
Yeah.
and I test my action, it's fine. It works.
What I love about the way that you're solving this problem is you're putting in a value that you know exists, so that you can distinguish between, is there a problem with the way we're communicating with the endpoint, or is there something in the variable side? And so
Yeah.
if I'm understanding it correctly, the conclusion I would make right now is, okay, the hub status endpoint is working as expected. What's missing is the value isn't being passed by WeWeb.
Yeah. Hi, Orange
Okay.
Mechanic, and actually know why. Because here I'm making I
Okay.
think I know why. I'm making a reference to an event that happened in the Kanban. And I'm trying to test it here, except I can't test it here because I did not move an item on the Kanban. I need to close my
Oh,
workflow.
okay.
I need to do what I did earlier. Earlier did not work because we had forgotten to publish our update. But now it should work if we go into preview mode. Let's go see. So now if I do debugging API calls, 6 common errors, even if I move it there, the status should be updated as done in
There it
Xano.
goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, and the reason it should be done is because I said it should be done. When in fact, what I should do is I should go ahead and say I moved it here. So this tells us where the card was moved to. And now if I go back, if I go to preview mode, I can, let's say it was here, so I can move it to in progress. And let's see what we have. Database. Yeah, there we go. So now it's in progress.
Success. All
Nice.
right.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that. And it's when you bind to an event, So this is the case for the Kanban element for sure. I'm trying to think of another element, but when you bind to an event like this, you won't be able to. The test here won't work. You'll need to test it live because we don't have that information. I thought we had it because there was an ID, so I thought, oh, we probably found a solution to display it, but it doesn't. We need to go into preview mode.
So one of the things that I would be thinking here is, but how do I know when I click in the live what happens? I'd love for you to show the navigator while you use the live piece. This was the big unlock for me with WeWeb. By showing the navigator variables instead of elements.
This one's okay.
And then when you click on the items, will we be able to see that on the left here?
Yeah, I think so. Let me refresh the page because now I have, when I dragged and dropped with another Kanban, it created more variables. So let me go into preview mode. Here we have a bunch of variables from our project. We don't care about those for now. What we care about is the variables from the components. So the Kanban is dragging, for example. So that's the one that will change. It should change anyway when see, if I'm
true.
moving this, it changes to true. If I type in something into my search bar, it changes here. But I don't have the new val. Or maybe I do have the values of the Kanban. Let's see. Hub just done. No. But I do have something that. So when part of my workflow initially was when you move it here, you display a pop-up, and by default I have all the spokes selected. So these are actually the IDs of the spoke, and if I unselect them,
That's cool.
I remove them from the array. And then if I create the new spokes, I send this array to Xano. So I tell Xano which spokes to create. And
that's
that
awesome.
You can see live when you... I would love to basically edit one spoke. And then I think in Xano, we can probably create some sort of function to like program it on a social media platform.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we can do here. So first, I'd love to introduce you guys to the sprintf filter. So I'll just bring this right up right now. Sprintf is something that we use all the time. And I'll give you an example of how it works, but you can just look it up here in text filters. It's under here called sprintf, and we walk you through it. So for example, what I see when I look at your app is that you have the ability to have these brackets with the different text that you'd want to be able to replace in. So I'd love to help build a function where we do something kind of like this. So we'll just call this text replace group for now. And I'm going to create an endpoint. And let's just say that what we're going to do is we're going to create a spoke, but we're going to use it with a template, right? So we might do something like, all right, well, I know that I'm going to want to pull in a spoke ID, and I'm going to go get that record in spoke. And remember that field value that we talked about, we're going to map that to spoke ID here. And one of my favorite things to do whenever I'm building is just add this utility function stop and debug. And I'm going to set it to this variable that I created, spoke1. There it is right there. Save it, run and debug. And so now, well, don't have spoke one. That's right, because we've been playing with a lot of different spokes. So let me go over here and see what ID I have to work with. 125. All right, so we'll do 125. And there we go. So now we get our spoke. And here's the content that we're able to produce. One of the cool things we can do is we could do something like, create a variable that says, content body. And let's just say that we're going to pass that in as a variable here. So we'll say something like, okay, well, we're creating this spoke, and I want to pass in the content that I want for the spoke. But the content is actually going to be like some brackets. So I'll go ahead and reset this now. So it might look like something like this, like, hi there, I learned this today. And so I've got that template. And what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to replace this. Well, what I can do over here is I can bring in that content variable. And I always like to save as I go, but I can add a variable that says, hey, I want you to go in and I want you to find this. And I want you to replace it with some variable substitution. So I can take, this and replace it. So we'll have some more time, next week to do that. And of course, Joyce, happy to send you a little preview video on this. But I think the text substitution, what we would be moving towards is you could take an article, you could have OpenAI, pull out a summary points from it, and you could actually have your first version of your spoke written for you in the format that you have using this sprintf text replacement formula
I love
filter.
this.
Yeah.
Love this. Well, I look forward to it. I know you have to run, so run.
I feel like we like, I would say mission completion. Like we got into a problem, we troubleshooted it together. We got to show some different ways that we'd figure it out on the Xano side and on the WeWeb side. And I'm like super eager to get to like, let's build some things. So I'm really looking forward to next week.
Yeah, for sure.